Have you ever been asked to leave your seat just because someone else looked more important? On SkyLumen Airlines Flight SL414, Black entrepreneur Marcus Reed, founder of technology group EthosAI Systems, was sitting in his right seat, 2A, first class. But just a few minutes later, flight attendant Aaron Blake walked up and asked him to give up his seat to a regular VIP named Victoria Grant, a well-dressed white woman. In the closed space of first class, all eyes were on Marcus. He could have been angry, he could have protested, or he could have kept quiet and let the truth take its course. What would you have done? 5 minutes later, everyone on the flight crew that day, from the flight attendants, the captain, to the manager, was fired. And justice spoke in the quietest way. Please like, share, and subscribe to join me in the story, where justice doesn't need to be shouted, but everyone must hear. The first-class speakers blared softly, over the smell of Arabica coffee and the sound of suitcases being dragged across the dark green carpet. SkyLumen Airlines Flight SL414 was about to depart from New York to San Francisco. Outside, it was raining lightly, and inside, everything seemed perfect, at least until people started to realize someone was sitting against the unwritten rules. Marcus Reed, a black man in a gray suit, laptop and old leather notebook, sat seat 2A, next to the window. He arrived early, as usual. He presented his ticket, scanned his boarding pass, and sat down quietly. No one knew that he was the CEO of EthosAI Systems, a multi-billion-dollar technology company that builds algorithms to reduce bias in customer service. He was just a passenger, reading emails, sipping coffee, and waiting for his flight to take off. Then Aaron Blake, the chief flight attendant for SL414, appeared. Her smile was still there, but a little strained. "Sorry, sir. There's been a slight mix-up," she said, her voice dropping enough to still convey the formal humility. "Seat 2A is reserved for a regular VIP, Ms. Victoria Grant. We were hoping you could help us move to seat 4C. It's also first class, just a little different." Marcus looked up. He smiled, not defensively, not too friendly. "It's okay, but I think there's a system error. I booked 2A. The ticket is confirmed, and I checked in on time. Here." He held out his matte black SkyLumen Elite card, next to the e-ticket on his phone. His voice was deep, clear, without a trace of tension. Aaron looked at the screen, then back at Marcus. There was a brief moment, as if she wanted to admit he was right, but then she pursed her lips, changing her tone. "Yes, I understand, Mr. Reed, but Mrs. Grant is a special passenger and has flown with us for over a decade. We have some flexibility in our arrangements. Please cooperate to make this flight as smooth as possible." Around them, a few passengers began to glance. A silver-haired man in row 3 whispered, "What's going on?" A young woman in seat 5B gently picked up her phone, turning the camera forward, as if sensing that this was more than just a small incident. Marcus was silent for a few seconds. He didn't need to raise his voice. "Miss Blake," he said slowly, "I have nothing against the airline serving regular customers, but I don't think flexibility is a substitute for policy. I just want to sit in the seat I bought." The flight attendant let out a small breath, her smile still there, but her eyes unnatural. "Mr. Reed, I understand, but please understand. We have internal procedures," he interrupted, still gently. "So can you show me that procedure, in writing, not verbally?" The atmosphere in the cabin suddenly became heavier. The question was not raised, but it pierced through the layer of politeness that had enveloped the situation. Aaron did not answer right away. She looked around, as if waiting for someone to come to her aid. Victoria Grant just walked up, confident, white dress, expensive perfume filled the air. She glanced at Marcus, then looked at Aaron. "What's the matter?" "Aaron, am I still sitting in 2A?" Aaron replied, "Yes, Mrs. Grant. Just a little problem. I'll fix it right away." Marcus nodded slightly, closing his laptop. He didn't need to say more. His calm gaze made it clear to Aaron where she stood between the two choices: professional rules and familiar privilege. A minute passed, then two. The passengers began to murmur. The clicking of cell phone cameras. The man in row 3 muttered, "He seems to know what he's doing." The woman in 5B continued filming, not out of curiosity, but as if she were recording something more important. Aaron finally whispered over the radio, "I need assistance in the first cabin. There's a seating issue." And so the conflict between fair service and invisible privilege officially began, not with a shout, but with silence. Marcus sat still, his hands on his knees, staring out the window where raindrops were sliding down the glass. Unknown to anyone in the cabin, the man would soon shake up the entire SkyLumen system in a matter of hours. But right now, he chose not to give up his seat. And then, when flexibility becomes an excuse to hide prejudice, all eyes start to turn to the silent person. But no one knows that the man sitting quietly in seat 2A came from a place where justice has no voice. Marcus Reed was born in Brookfield, Chicago's east side, where people learn to survive before they learn to dream. His father, David Reed, worked as a mechanic in a small workshop near the docks. One evening, he didn't come home, shot in what police later called an unintelligible incident during a robbery. No one was arrested. No one was held accountable. Only the 12-year-old boy stood outside the police station, watching the people coming and going, and understood one thing: skin color can erase the truth. From then on, Marcus grew up with a silent vow. There will come a day when people will no longer be allowed to look at others wrongly just because they are different from themselves. With no money for college, he taught himself programming using an old computer his neighbor had thrown away. Every night, in his musty rented room, the sound of his keyboard became the only heartbeat of his belief that technology could see people as more equal than society. Years later, he created EthosAI Systems, an artificial intelligence platform that detects unconscious bias in service decisions from hiring to credit to customer service. The idea started with an interview where he was rejected because the HR manager thought he didn't fit the company culture. Ironically, today, the same man sitting in first class is being treated with bias in the very field he's dedicated his life to correcting. The morning before his flight, Marcus left his small hotel near JFK Airport. He didn't take a private car, just a regular taxi. During the short ride, the driver, a Haitian immigrant, asked him, "Where are you flying to, Mr. Reed?" Marcus smiled. "San Francisco. I have to speak at the Global Tech and Ethics Conference. I'm talking about fairness in automated systems." The driver laughed. "I hope they're listening. The world has forgotten the meaning of fairness." Marcus simply replied, "That's okay." Listening sometimes begins with silence. At the first-class ticket check-in area, security cameras captured the moment he stopped to help an old woman who had dropped her wallet. No one knew he was a billionaire. He had no bodyguards, no logo, no noise. He just wore a simple black jacket, walking slowly like a man with nothing to prove. On the plane, when Aaron Blake asked him to give up his seat, Marcus recognized a familiar look, the same look that had haunted him throughout his childhood on the East Side. It was not a look of hatred, but of blind confidence that others deserved better. He remembered his father. He remembered the night he was called a suspect just because he was standing in the wrong place. And he remembered his mother saying, "Don't let anger define you. Let wisdom do it." So as Erin Blake stood there, her notebook clutched tightly in her hand, Marcus didn't look at her angrily. He just stared straight ahead with eyes that had learned to be calm, even in the face of injustice. On the table next to seat 2A, his phone still had the presentation for the Global Tech and Ethics Summit open. Title, When Machines Learn Bias from Humans. When Machines Relearn Human Bias. He chuckled. Perhaps, he thought, it was humans who needed to relearn fairness. Today, not machines. Erin stood there, confused between rules and customer first. She wasn't a bad person. She was just in a system where customers mattered more than right or wrong. As Marcus sat still, a few passengers began to whisper. A white man in row 3 whispered to his wife, maybe he should change, just to speed things up. His wife replied, but if that's his seat, why should he give it up? That small question was like the first crack in the wall of silence. In the cockpit, Nolan Pierce, the flight manager, approaches, but now we stop at Marcus, who is looking out the window. He can't hear the chatter behind him, nor does he need to. What he hears most clearly is his heartbeat steady, slow, as if he were meditating. The anger, if any, is still there, but he knows how to package it, keep it inside, because he knows that an angry black man in first class is always seen as a threat, not a human being. He slowly placed his hand on the silver pen, the only gift he had left from his father. It read, "Stay calm, stay true." He always did. As Erin turned to leave, his eyes fell on the small SkyLumen logo embroidered on her shirt, a pair of glowing wings. Perhaps, he thought, the light the company carried didn't reach everyone. In the frame that the passenger was filming with his phone, Marcus appeared as a man who just sat still, not arguing, not yelling, not giving in, but on a deeper level. It was a silent declaration. I have a right to be here, and I won't need to shout for someone to acknowledge it. The door was still open. The staff began a quick conversation on the intercom. From the back of the cabin, Victoria Grant approached, with the scent of expensive perfume and the conviction that the seat was hers. Marcus remained seated, his eyes following the raindrops sliding down the window. The story hasn't even begun yet, but what he's about to do will make the world listen, not because he shouted, but because he chose to be silent when the world was at its loudest. Outside the cabin, Victoria Grant's footsteps echoed softly, sharp as a knife. And then, at 10:42, what happened on flight SL414 would cost the entire airline something they had always considered a small matter. Victoria Grant walked in, her smile enough to make the entire flight crew stand up straight. Her wavy blonde hair, ivory jacket, and the scent of Chanel No. 5 filled the air like a silent declaration of status. She glanced around the cabin, then stopped at seat 2A, where Marcus Reed was still sitting calm, his hands resting on his knees. "Erin." Victoria's voice was soft but sharp. "I thought this was mine." Erin Blake swallowed, then bowed her head and whispered, "Yes, Mrs. Grant, we're working on it. There was just a little mix-up." Mistaken Victoria raised an eyebrow, turning to Marcus. "Sir, I always sit in 2A. You may not know, but this airline reserves this seat for its most loyal customers. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus looked up slightly. His eyes were not hostile, just the calm of someone accustomed to prejudice. "It's okay," he said slowly. "I have a ticket, and I checked in properly. You can check with the airline. Then he looked back out the window, as if the story wasn't important enough to upset his composure. That answer made Victoria pause. A black man, refusing to give up his seat for her in first class. She smiled faintly, then leaned over and whispered to Aaron, "You know how long I've been flying SkyLumen?" "Right." Aaron nodded. "Then don't make me lose faith in the airline." "Understand." Her hand slipped into her coat pocket, then pulled out a folded bill $100 and quietly slipped it into Aaron's hip pocket. A passenger sitting nearby caught the moment. The phone camera was on. Low angle, but clear enough. No one said anything. Just a small click, like a grain of sand falling into still water. 5 minutes later, Nolan Pierce, the flight manager, appeared. He wore a gray suit. His name tag was shiny. His voice was clear and precise, almost fake. "Hello, Mr. Reed. This is Nolan Pierce, flight supervisor today." "There was a slight misunderstanding regarding seating." Marcus nodded slightly. Keeping his voice calm, I heard. "And I also explained, my ticket is 2A. No mistake." "Yes," Nolan said. "But Ms. Grant is a VIP passenger of the airline, with over 10 years of service with SkyLumen. We have a small amount of flexibility in the arrangement to ensure the best experience for our regular customers." He used the word flexible lightly, but there was a cold command in it. Marcus put his hand on his ticket, his voice even. "Flexibility doesn't mean breaking policy. I paid for this seat, and I need to sit here to do some work before going to the conference." He gently opened his laptop. The screen showing the title, Global Tech and Ethics Summit. Nolan glanced at it, recognized the event name, but kept a polite smile. "I understand, Mr. Reed, but please cooperate. We don't want to cause a scene." "Right." The last sentence falls like a warning. The atmosphere in the cabin began to change. The people around were silent, but their eyes were fixed on Marcus. One person was filming. Another pretended to read a magazine, but listened intently. The so-called small mistake had now become a test of character. Marcus sighed. He understood this kind of power all too well. Power that needed no laws, just a look. He closed his laptop and looked up at Nolan. "You're asking me to violate my rights to protect the comfort of others. I wasn't causing trouble. I didn't do anything wrong. I just sat in the seat I was assigned." Nolan frowned slightly. He wasn't used to such calm answers. It made his authority feel weightless. He glanced at Aaron, then said quietly enough for Marcus to hear, "Mr. Reed, I'm asking you to cooperate, or we'll be forced to call security. This is flexibility, not discrimination." Marcus looked straight at him, his voice still soft. "Really so. Who defines flexible? You are the company rules." The first-class cabin was silent. The hum of the engines outside mingled with the tense silence. Victoria Grant turned her face to the window, trying to appear unconcerned. Aaron bowed her head, her hand still unconsciously touching her pocket, where the bill was still there. Like a freshly printed stain that had not yet dried, a passenger in row 3 whispered, "He seems right. Why don't they check their tickets?" The woman filming the video whispered, "This isn't a mistake anymore. This is how they treat people." And in that moment, as the phone started to rise, SkyLumen Airlines was in crisis mode. They just didn't know it yet. Marcus closed his eyes. He remembered his father, his mother's words, "Don't let your anger define you." So he didn't yell. He just pulled out his phone, turned on the camera, and held it to his chest. "You can continue," he said to Nolan, "because I'm going to record this conversation. I'm sure your company would like to see how flexible is implemented." Nolan was slightly startled. "You're not allowed to film in the cabin." "You know that," Marcus replied. "I'm allowed to film as long as it doesn't interfere with the flight. And right now, I'm just sitting there." The words, smooth as water, heavy as steel. Nolan started to say more, but the look in Marcus's eyes stopped him. It wasn't the look of a man who was afraid, but of a man who knew he was right and was willing to let the world see it. In the back row, the woman filming leaned over and whispered to her friend, "He doesn't have to scream, but there's something about him that silences the whole car." Her friend replied, "Justice doesn't have to be loud. It just requires someone to sit still." Her camera was still recording everything: Victoria's sneaky money, Aaron's wavering eyes, Nolan's cold smile, and Marcus Reed's absolute calm. A seemingly meaningless video recording, but just hours later, it would make the world know the name SkyLumen, not for the flight, but for a lesson in justice. As the plane doors closed, Marcus sat still, his gaze fixed on the gray sky outside. Little did he know that, in a few minutes, the flexibility would turn into a media storm, and every person in the cabin that day, from Aaron Blake to Nolan Pierce, would have to face themselves. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin of SL414 was so thick it felt as if time had stopped. No one spoke, just looked at the black man still sitting in seat 2A, among faces tense with fear of doing something wrong, or of offending someone. Aaron Blake tried to maintain a professional smile, but her hands were no longer calm. The bill was still there in her pocket, folded and flat, a mark of choice. It felt heavier, as if with each passing second, her moral worth was being weighed in someone else's hands. Behind, Victoria Grant sat sideways, legs crossed, eyes cold. She said nothing, just lightly snapped her fingernails on the chair. Click, click, a small but powerful sound, as if reminding everyone, "Don't forget who the regulars are here." Nolan Pierce returned from the cockpit. He had just received a radio signal from Captain Thomas Avery. "If it doesn't work out, remove the passenger from the plane. We don't need the trouble." Nolan placed his hands on the back of the chair and leaned down in front of Marcus. His voice was smooth, as if he had practiced it 1,000 times in front of a mirror. "Mr. Reed, I really hope you understand our position. We are just doing the right thing to keep the flight running smoothly. You can move to seat 4C, and we will give you a voucher for a free first-class flight next time." Marcus didn't look up. He had a document open slides for his upcoming speech. Bias isn't a mistake. It's a choice. He smiled slightly. "Mr. Pierce," he said softly, "what you just said is exactly what I will be talking about at the conference tomorrow morning. That systems do not breed favoritism. People do. And when you trade one person's convenience for another's fairness, you have turned a process into a tool of discrimination." Nolan stood up straight. He tried to contain his irritation, but his face was turning red. "Mr. Reed, please don't make a big deal out of something as simple as a seat." Marcus looked up, his gaze so calm it made Nolan flinch. "I'm not politicizing," he said. "I'm just sitting in a seat I paid for. That seems to some people to be a political act." A soft chuckle came from the back seat. One of the passengers, the woman who had filmed the video earlier, was suppressing a sigh. She knew this moment was no longer a little fight. It was symbolic. Aaron gently pulled Nolan aside. "Nolan, there are cameras rolling," she whispered. "If we kick him off, he'll shut up." Nolan snapped. "Mrs. Grant is the airline's revenue earner. He's just a passenger. If I had to choose, I'd know who to pick. It was the first time Nolan's voice lost its composure, and it was the moment everyone in the cabin understood the hidden message. At SkyLumen Airlines, tipping and status matter more than policy. Here, regulars don't just have privileges, they get to define fairness. Victoria leaned in, a half smile on her face. See, Aaron, it's simple. Once he leaves, the flight is fine. Aaron pursed her lips, looking at Marcus, who sat upright, not a single movement wasted. She found herself looking at a calm she didn't have. He didn't need to speak to prove who was right, just to be there as if his very existence was the quietest accusation against them. Nolan took a step forward. "Mr. Reed," he said, "I'll be blunt. If you don't move from your chair, I'll have to call the airport security in. We don't want this to be a problem, but you're making everyone uncomfortable." Marcus placed his hands on the armrests and slowly turned his head to look around the cabin. All eyes averted except one. The woman in row 5B was still holding her phone, dialing. He nodded to her, as if to say, "Thank you. Let the light shine where it needs to." Then he looked back at Nolan, his voice low and steady. "Do you think I make people uncomfortable? Or is it because you can't stand the image of a black man standing up for what's right?" The words, soft, shook the cabin. Nolan opened his mouth, then closed it. Erin held her breath. Victoria rolled her eyes, tried to smile, but her lips trembled slightly. Meanwhile, in a hidden corner, a male passenger sitting near the aisle. He was still filming with a small 4K camera. His lens captured every detail: Victoria stuffing the money, Erin accepting it, Nolan forcing it, and Marcus's last words. The video would later be viewed millions of times, setting off a moral storm that SkyLumen never expected. But for now, it was just a short clip, stored in silence. Nolan pulled out his walkie-talkie and pressed the button. "Security, first class. We need to assist an uncooperative passenger." The sentence was short, sharp, and cold. Marcus didn't respond, just closed his laptop and set it aside. He understood that this game was no longer about the seating level, it was about morality, and he knew he wouldn't need to win with words. Erin said softly, "Mr. Nolan, please enough." He interrupted. "This is my decision." Outside, security personnel were approaching. Inside, passengers' phones were still rolling, every glance clearly recorded. Another moment, and SkyLumen would be in the eye of the storm, because they forgot that sometimes the silence of the right is more powerful than all the voices of the wrong. Marcus leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He didn't resist. He said just one sentence, loud enough for the person closest to him to hear: "I don't need to win. I just need them to lose." As two security guards entered the cabin, a phone was still recording, and outside the frame, a world was about to explode because one man chose not to give up his seat. Leather shoes clicked lightly on the carpet. Two airport security officers entered, neat uniforms, expressionless faces. They didn't look around, didn't ask much. Nolan Pierce pointed at Marcus Reed, his voice cold as an order. "Here, uncooperative passenger." Captain Thomas Avery stepped out of the cockpit, tall and serious, but uncertain. He glanced at Marcus, then at Nolan, as if to confirm their agreement. "We need to make sure the flight is on time. Follow the procedure. Process." The word drops like a sentence. No reason, no debate. It can make an innocent person into an outcast, just because the system finds it convenient. Marcus looked up slightly. The cabin light reflected off his glasses. It was eerily calm. He didn't say much, just opened his phone and turned on the camera in front of him. "I'll record it all," he said, his voice even and clear. "It's not illegal if I don't interfere with the flight. I need proof not to win, but to remember that this happened." Erin Blake stood still, her face pale. Victoria Grant chuckled, crossed her legs, and turned to the window. "Gosh, what a waste of time for a troublemaker." One of the two security guards approached, speaking quietly but firmly. "Sir, please cooperate. If you do not leave your chair, we will be forced to do so." Marcus looked him straight in the eye. "Are you sure you understand why I am being asked to leave my chair?" The guard paused, his eyes wavering. But the other man interrupted. "Orders are orders. We are not here to discuss." The first-class cabin was dead silent. No one spoke, only the faint sound of engines and cameras from a few seats back. A male passenger whispered, "He didn't do anything. Are they really going to drag him out?" The woman next to him replied, "They will, because here, the regulars always win." Nolan took a step forward, his voice suddenly quiet, as if trying to contain his embarrassment. "Mr. Reed, don't make things difficult. We'll apologize, and make sure you get proper compensation." Marcus smiled faintly. "You don't understand. Nolan, I don't need to apologize. I need you to understand why this is wrong." He stood up. No hurried movements, no angry glances. He just pulled his small suitcase, closed his phone, and looked straight into the camera. "Thanks," he said softly. "Keep this." Erin bowed her head, not daring to look at him. Victoria Grant leaned forward, adjusting her chair, a smile on her face, a smile of temporary victory. Nolan signaled to the security guard, "Get him out." Marcus walked slowly down the aisle. An older white passenger in row 3 whispered to his companion, "He's calmer than I thought. I would have lost my temper." The other replied, "That's how you keep your dignity, when someone else tries to take it away." As Marcus approached the cabin door, Captain Thomas Avery whispered into the microphone, "Security cleared. Prepare to close." His voice trembled slightly, but everyone heard it. Marcus paused for a second, turning his head to look back at the first-class cabin. His eyes met Erin, who was standing straight, tears welling up in her eyes. He simply said, "Don't let this become a habit." Then he walked away without looking back. The door closed behind him with a dry click. It was a small sound, but it split the world in two between the rejected and those who thought themselves safe. A few minutes later, Victoria Grant sat down leisurely in seat 2A. She smiled, sipping the champagne Erin had handed her. "See? It's finally here." Nolan stood beside her, nodding, a forced smile on his face. "Yes, Mrs. Grant. We apologize for the inconvenience," Erin replied quietly, her voice dry. "Yes, everything is here, but in her head." Marcus's words still echoed, "Don't let this become a habit." Her hand lightly touched her pocket, where the money still lay. It was like an invisible burn, slowly burning away her remaining self-respect. Outside, at the boarding gate, Marcus sat down in the waiting chair and turned on his phone. He opened the video he had just recorded, watching his own calm face reflected on the screen. A few airport employees passed by and recognized him, but didn't dare say anything. He didn't blame them. They were all just doing their jobs. The problem wasn't with the individual, but with a system that was accustomed to making mistakes without shame. A young officer approached and said in a low voice, "Sir, I am very sorry for what happened. I see that everything was wrong." Marcus smiled and simply replied, "Don't be sorry. Just remember, because justice doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins with the person who dares to see what is wrong. He closed his phone and looked out the window where the plane was taxiing down the runway. The sunlight slanted through, cutting his reflection in half in light, half in shadow. He knew this battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And when the light hit the woman in row 5B, SkyLumen would have to face what they were trying to hide. On social media, just hours after the plane took off, the first video appeared. No one knew who posted it, but within 30 minutes, millions of people had seen it. And the only question that rang out was if that was you. What would you do if justice was kicked off the plane? JFK Airport, Gate B27. Passengers were disembarking. The loudspeakers were ringing regularly, coldly, as if nothing had happened. Only Marcus Reed sat quietly in his waiting chair. In front of him was a cold cup of coffee. Beside him was a phone with the screen turned off but still recording. "You don't need to tell anyone. You just need proof." Light footsteps sounded from behind. A female voice said, a little shaky but firm, "Mr. Reed, excuse me, I'm the one sitting in a row 5B. Marcus turned around. It was a woman with brown hair, about 40, small but with bright eyes. She held her phone tightly in her hand, stepped forward, and bowed slightly. "I recorded the whole thing, from the moment the stewardess walked up until you left the plane, even Mrs. Grant stuffing the money into your pocket." There was a voice. Clearly, she took out her phone, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can't stay silent. I know. If no one says anything, they will continue to do this to others." Marcus looked at her for a few seconds. He didn't thank her right away, just nodded slightly. His eyes were warm, but deep as water. "You kept the original, yes," she replied. "I have it on the cloud and on a memory stick. If you need me, I'm willing to testify. I don't want them to erase this like it never happened." He turned on his phone, quickly pressed a few keys, and called Olivia Hart, co of EthosAI Systems. The female voice on the other end was clear and professional. "Marcus, where are you? I heard the flight was delayed. Are you okay?" "Not good," he said curtly, as if reading a report. "I was just asked to leave the plane for refusing to give up my seat to a regular VIP. There's video. There's witnesses. I'm sending it to the legal department right now." A moment of silence. Then Olivia exhaled, her voice low. "Are you hurt?" Marcus chuckled, his eyes still on the runway. "No. I just see what we're trying to fix in the tech system is still alive and well in the real world." He connected the video from the woman's phone and uploaded it directly to EthosAI's secure servers. "I want the legal and communications teams to act on it as soon as they receive it. No cuts, no edits. Keep the entire audio, including the silence." Olivia replied. "Understood. I'll let the legal team know. And Marcus, yeah. Are you still speaking tomorrow?" Marcus smiled. A light, unthinking affirmation. "Of course. Now I have a living example for my technology and bias talk." The woman looked at him, a little surprised. "You're really not angry?" "If it were me," Marcus interrupted, his voice low and warm, "if you get angry, they'll call you a fanatic. If you keep quiet, they'll call you a weakling. But if you're steadfast, they'll be forced to listen." She nodded, her eyes welling up. "You know," she said, "I used to think justice was the responsibility of those in power. But it turns out it begins with those who dare to witness." Marcus smiled. "You did what the rest of the flight didn't dare do." Justice sometimes only requires one person to keep the camera open, They sat in silence for a few minutes. A message appeared on a nearby screen, SL414, takeoff. Marcus's eyes followed. Not resentful, just strangely calm. He said quietly, as if to himself, "It's okay. They can fly away first. But the truth will arrive before them." The woman took out her business card and handed it to him. "Emma Lawson," she introduced herself. "Freelance journalist. I used to write for Human Frontline. I know how to keep this story from getting buried." Marcus took it and nodded. "Good. But let justice take its course. No sensationalism, no retaliation, just shining a light in a dark place." Emma looked at him, the man who had just been publicly humiliated, but spoke in the voice of a teacher. She said softly, "You don't need to shout to be heard. They will hear you because you don't shout." At that moment, a gentle breeze blew through the lobby. The coffee cup on the table tilted, and a few drops fell to the floor, rolling slowly, perfectly, in circles. Marcus watched, as if he could see a new timeline beginning. Hours later, in EthosAI's San Francisco office, Olivia Hart received the video file. She watched it once, no rewind, no pause. At 42 seconds, as Victoria Grant stuffed the money into Aaron's pocket, she clenched her fists. At 4 minutes, as Marcus was forced to leave, she bit her lip, her voice shaking. "Oh my God, they just kicked the CEO of their biggest partner off their plane." She picked up the phone. "Get ready for an emergency legal meeting, and no one sends this video out until Marcus says so. We're going to do it right, not fast." At JFK, Marcus stood up, picking up his suitcase. He turned to Emma, smiling slightly. "Thanks for seeing," she replied. "Thanks for not being angry." He chuckled. "Anger only makes me who they think I am. Silence makes them see who they are." He left, walking slowly, straight, without looking back. Behind him, Emma watched, her eyes sparkling with a rare belief that the truth sometimes doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs someone strong enough not to turn away. When Olivia Hart's phone sent the message, "Video received, verified," the world had no idea that just hours later, that video would send SkyLumen Airlines into freefall, not out of the sky, but into the public eye. 12 hours later, the morning in San Francisco opened with a storm. Not a rainstorm, but a cyberstorm. The 4-minute, 17-second video, which captured the entire incident on flight SL414, first appeared on the X platform, formerly Twitter, posted by an account named Human Frontline Emma. Within 30 minutes, it reached 1 million views. Within 3 hours, that number was 8.6 million. And before SkyLumen's communications team could meet, the hashtag #EachOurSeat2A had climbed to the top of the global trend. The images are clear. Marcus Reed, a black man, sitting quietly in seat 2A. Victoria Grant stuffing the bill into the flight attendant's pocket. Nolan Pierce threatening cooperate or else. Aaron Blake head bowed, eyes full of conflict. And the final moment, Marcus stands up, pulling his suitcase, whispering, "I don't need to win. I just need them to lose." That sentence echoed across thousands of clippings, millions of comment threads, billions of angry pixels. All of America was talking about it. But no one was talking louder than those who had been wronged in silence. The next morning, the news programs all opened with the same headline: SkyLumen Airlines kicks black CEO out of first class. Because of VIP regulars. On television, editors played back the footage, each frame slowing down Marcus's eyes, Victoria's gestures, Aaron's hands. No words needed, just the image is enough for the audience to decide for themselves who was right and who was wrong. On Good Morning America, the middle-aged white host spoke slowly, his voice heavy. There was something about the way he stood up, not fighting, not reacting, just quietly, but it made the whole world look at itself. At SkyLumen's office, CEO Leonard Price got his first call at 5:45 m. 3 hours later, more than 2,000 angry emails flooded into the company's inbox. Major media outlets, Reuters, Bloomberg, CNN, all clamored for a response. Less than 10 minutes after the market opened, the SkyLumen shares fell 8%, then plunged 12% in a single morning. Leonard threw the phone on the table, his eyes dark, his voice hoarse. This should have been just a small mistake. How did it turn into such a storm? The assistant replied softly. Because they fired the wrong person. Sir. The person who was fired was not just a guest. He was Marcus Reed. There was a long, suffocating silence. Leonard stared at the screen. The text was clear. EthosAI Systems, $50 million technology partnership. Below it was an update. Marcus Reed, CEO and major shareholder, was discriminated against on a flight by SkyLumen Airlines. My God, we just fired the guy who was in control of the security technology for our entire system, he muttered. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Marcus stepped out of the elevator at EthosAI's offices. Employees lined the hallway. No one spoke, just nodded, eyes full of respect. Olivia Hart waited at the conference room door, her voice low. The video's going viral. The whole world is watching. Marcus nodded, put his briefcase down on the table, and asked simply, what was the public reaction? Angry? But not just angry about the color of their skin. They were angry about the disregard for human dignity. He was silent for a moment, then said, that's good. Anger is the beginning, but justice is the destination. He opened his laptop, and dozens of emails from major newspapers appeared on the screen. Below was a new message from Emma Lawson. I don't know if you're going to answer the press, but everyone is waiting to hear what you have to say. Marcus looked at the text, then typed again, not now. Let them finish speaking first. I will only speak when the truth is quiet enough to be heard. Meanwhile, in a small Brooklyn cafe, a group of college students were reviewing the video. A young white woman burst into tears. He didn't need to fight back. Just one look from him was enough to make the whole car bow its head. A black man nearby spoke slowly. He did what we've all been waiting for to prove that justice doesn't need screaming. Within 24 hours, SkyLumen lost more than $2.4 billion in market value. Civil rights groups called for an investigation. Thousands of social media users posted photos of themselves cutting up SkyLumen customer cards. The hashtag #ProFlyFairSky became #RoseBoycottSkyLumen. A former airline pilot wrote, I used to believe I worked for a company that respected people. Now I understand they only respect people in power. At the same time, Marcus received another text message, this time from an unknown number. I'm Aaron Blake. I'm the chief flight attendant on SL414. I need to see you. I haven't slept since. Marcus read, silent. His gaze remained impassive, but his breathing deepened slightly. Not because he was angry, but because he knew justice was beginning to work. No court, no judge, just the conscience of those involved waking up. That evening, television replayed the entire story. The image of Marcus walking through the airport gates, light reflecting off the floor, slow, proud. A commentator on NBC said, they say power comes from the voice, but sometimes real power comes from the person who knows when to keep silent. In the quiet of his office, Marcus looked out at the night city. Below, hundreds of SkyLumen billboards were still lit, but he knew the light was no longer shining on the sky, but on their own mistakes. He put down his glass of water and said softly, Justice is never late. It just waits until someone dares to look at you. And then, when Leonard Price, CEO of SkyLumen Airlines, realized that the person his company had humiliated was their biggest partner, he understood that there are mistakes that cannot be fixed with money, but can only be redeemed with the truth. The sky over Manhattan on Monday morning was a thick gray, a light rain falling on the glass of the SkyLumen Tower. In his 47th floor office, Leonard Price sat motionless in front of his monitor, his coffee cold on his desk, and the headline from an emergency report that had just arrived in bold. The man forced off Flight SL414. Marcus Reed, CEO of EthosAI Systems. He read the name 3 times, but each time his eyes darkened. The room fell silent, only the wind blowing through the windows and his heart pounding, as if counting the seconds before everything fell apart. Personal assistant, Harold, stood still at the door, his voice soft. "Sir, he is a partner in the SkyLumen Passenger Analysis System Upgrade Project. The contract is worth $50 million. Leonard raised his head and asked softly, his voice choked up, "And he is also—" "Yes, sir." "He owns 25% of EthosAI. EthosAI is the one that provides artificial intelligence technology to monitor customer service fairness for SkyLumen Airlines itself." Leonard clenched the report in his hand, and in that moment, he understood the deepest irony life had ever dealt him. SkyLumen had kicked off the plane, the very man who had created the technology that would help them avoid discrimination. He walked to the window. The city below was blurred in the rain, but the news on the LED screen in the building opposite was still bright. Pro Seat 2A. SkyLumen Airlines faces allegations of racism. EthosAI confirms CEO Marcus Reed was the victim in the incident. SkyLumen shares plummet. Customer confidence crisis. Leonard closed his eyes. Each word felt like a hammer blow. He was not a cruel man, but he had allowed a system crueler than himself to operate for too long. "My God," he whispered, "we have shot ourselves in the heart." In the conference room downstairs, the media team was arguing furiously. "We need to make a statement now, blame the lower-level staff, fire a few people, and get this over with." One said. Another countered, "If Mr. Reed goes public, no statement will save the company. He is a respected figure in the tech ethics industry. The public will not forgive him." A female voice, Clara, the head of communications, lowered her voice. "Mr. Reed is not just a CEO. He is an icon. He teaches at Stanford, advises organizations on data fairness. If we think we can just say sorry and forget it, we are playing with gasoline." No one answered, only Leonard's desperate gaze from the surveillance room door. He knew that all his apologies were now like coins dropped into a pit, echoing, but changing nothing. That afternoon, Leonard received a call from the board of directors. The chairman's voice rang out, hard and cold. "Leonard, you know Reed has veto power in our data contract. If he withdraws, the entire global passenger analytics network will stop." Leonard tried to keep his voice calm. "We can negotiate. I will meet with him." "No," the chairman said firmly. "You are no longer negotiable. You are asking for a pardon from the man whose staff you let humiliate." The words fell like a verdict. Leonard hung up, stood still, then laughed a dry, bitter laugh. "Silent justice. I get it. They don't need revenge. They just let us fall." Around 7 p.m., he walked into a private conference room, turned on his laptop, and connected with Marcus Reed. The screen lit up, and Marcus's face appeared calm and composed, as if nothing had happened. "Mr. Reed," Leonard began, his voice low, almost a confession. I I want to say that I am truly sorry. I had no idea this was happening on our flight. I assure you, it was a staff error." Marcus didn't interrupt. He just looked, his eyes as calm as water. When Leonard finished, he nodded slightly. "I believe you didn't do it yourself, but you created the system that made it happen, and the system only changes when the person at the top looks at it." Leonard swallowed. "What do you want?" Marcus leaned back slightly, his voice calm but heavy. "I don't want anything for myself, but I want SkyLumen to face the truth, not with apologies in the newspaper, but with actions. Because justice doesn't need to be said, it needs to be seen." Leonard looked at Marcus for a moment. The man didn't need to shout, didn't need political power, and didn't need to threaten. With just his silence and intelligence, he made an entire corporation tremble. "Mr. Reed," Leonard said softly, "we're in a $50 million deal. If you back out, SkyLumen will lose at least 30% of its market value. I beg you, don't let that happen." Marcus smiled slightly, not bitterly, just sadly. "Leonard, there are things lost because people forget ethics before forgetting the contract." Then he ended the call, leaving only the cold words on the screen. Connection ended by user. Leonard sat alone in the large room. Outside the window, the Manhattan sky was hazy, and the SkyLumen billboards were still lit. But to him, the light had become a bitter reminder that privilege doesn't protect anyone when the truth starts to speak. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The image of Marcus in seat 2A, calm amid the humiliation, played back in his mind like a slow-motion movie. For the first time in his career, Leonard Price felt small, not in the face of human power, but in the face of human dignity. Leonard didn't sleep that night. He knew he had to call Marcus back tomorrow morning not to apologize, but to ask for a chance to fix the system that had betrayed humanity. 6:45 a.m. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the glass windows of SkyLumen Tower. Leonard Price was already sitting in his office, his coffee cold, his suit jacket still unbuttoned. On the desk were two pieces of paper. One was a crisis report. The other was a partnership contract with EthosAI Systems. Between the two sheets, there was only a blank space, the space between apology and responsibility. He looked at the screen. Marcus Reed's name flashed. He took a deep breath and pressed call. On the other side, Marcus sat in his San Francisco office. The light was barely out of the sky, reflecting off his face calm, sharp, and controlled. He watched his phone vibrate, smiling slightly, as if he had known this call was coming. "Good morning, Leonard?" His voice was soft and even, neither cold nor friendly a voice that made one feel small. "Marcus, I'm sorry," Leonard began, his voice hoarse. "I want to talk privately, just the two of us. I want to handle this internally and make sure SkyLumen does everything it can to clear your name." Marcus was silent for a few seconds. The light reflected in his eyes, deep and cold, like still water. "My honor," he said slowly, each word distinct. "Leonard, you cannot take back what you cannot take away. What you need to take back is the dignity of your own company." Leonard swallowed, trying to keep his voice soft. "I understand, but if you publicly criticize us, SkyLumen will collapse. Tens of thousands of employees will lose their jobs. Please let us handle it internally. I promise to fire those involved. Introduce a retraining program." Marcus interrupted, softly but firmly. "Leonard, you're talking as if this is just the fault of a few individuals. But your problem isn't a few names. It's a culture one that teaches people that loyalty is more valuable than fairness." The room next to Leonard was silent. Only the sound of the wind outside the window blowing through the cold glass was left. Marcus continued, his voice unchanged. SkyLumen has not only offended me. You have offended the trust of your customers, people who believe that fairness is a right, not a privilege. I do not want an apology. I want an emergency shareholders meeting. Leonard was startled. Shareholders? You mean yes, Marcus replied. I want the entire board to sit down and answer publicly. What culture allows racism to be called VIP flexibility? Leonard fell silent. The statement was no longer a request. It was a judgment. After a few seconds of silence, Leonard tried to regain his usual leadership tone. Marcus, I understand you're angry, Marcus chuckled. Leonard, you're mistaken. I'm not angry. If I were, I would have said more. But because I want SkyLumen to learn something, I'm still silent. His voice was low and even, like a silent knife cutting through the polished facade of the corporate world. Leonard lowered his voice, almost pleading. What do you want to end this money? A public apology, Marcus replied without thinking. I want to change, not for me, but for the people who will be sitting in seat 2A. I want SkyLumen to look at itself, and if it can't do that, I'll let the market do it for me. Leonard sank into a chair. The morning light fell on his face, making him look 10 years older. He understood this was no longer a negotiation. This was a moral trial, and Marcus was the judge. Marcus continued, his voice soft as a breath. I've contacted the legal team. They will be filing a formal request for an emergency shareholder meeting in the next 48 hours. If SkyLumen really wants to prove it has shame, do the right thing before they have to. Leonard looked down at the table, his fingers tapping lightly on the wood. Marcus, you're backing me into a corner. Marcus replied. No. Leonard, I'm giving you a way out. Leonard's voice caught in that moment. He looked at the screen, the black man who had been kicked out of seat 2A, now speaking to him with the eyes of a man who had risen above humiliation. He suddenly understood true power lies not in a title, but in how one confronts injustice without losing oneself. Marcus slowly ended the call. I won't be doing any more media. I don't need to destroy SkyLumen. If you fix it yourself, I'll be the first to say you did the right thing. But if you just want to cover it up, then justice won't need me. It will come. He paused. Hello, Leonard. I hope this isn't the last time we talk, but the first time you really listen. The screen went black. Leonard sat in the quiet room for a long time. On his desk, the SkyLumen logo was imprinted beneath the report, half obscured by his hand. He looked out the window. The city was still bright. But to him, the light had become a bitter reminder. No business fails because of mistakes. Only businesses die because they try to deny mistakes. On the other side of the bank, Marcus stood by the glass doors of EthosAI, watching the sun rise over San Francisco Bay. Olivia walked in and asked softly, Do you plan to continue working with them? That depends, Marcus replied without turning around. Justice is not an end, but a beginning. If they understood that, perhaps there was still time. He took a sip of coffee, smiling slightly. If not, then justice will find another way to teach them. 2 days later, as the SkyLumen Board of Directors sat down for an emergency meeting, the big screen lit up, showing the moment Marcus Reed was forced out of seat 2A. And for the first time in the company's history, that most powerful room, it was silent. On Wednesday morning, the 50th floor of SkyLumen Tower was ablaze with light. The large glass-walled, high-ceilinged, cold conference room, usually a place filled with numbers, was now filled with judgment. On the main screen, the EthosAI Systems logo flashed, then disappeared, replaced by Marcus Reed's face. He wore no tie, just a plain white shirt, sitting upright, looking straight into the camera. Across from him, Leonard Price and 11 other board members sat silently, their faces covered with reports, red charts of stock prices, and the heavy gaze of their own consciences. Marcus began in a cold, calm voice. "Thank you for coming. I won't take long, and I'm not here to listen to apologies." A click. The video appeared on the screen, the original unedited version. Each frame was razor sharp. Victoria Grant stuffing money into Aaron Blake's pocket. Nolan Pierce forcing Marcus from his chair. Captain Thomas Avery standing still. No one said a word, only the steady sound of the recording, each one dropping to the table like heavy stones. Cooperation or coercion. This is a VIP guest. We can be flexible. You just need to leave your seat. It's no big deal. Then silence. A long, icy silence. Leonard bowed his head. The rest of the faces were stunned. One of the council members, his voice trembling. "My God, is this real?" Marcus replied immediately, his voice low but firm. "It is true, and it is verified by passenger cameras, by witnesses, and by the silence of the system you created." He paused, then spoke slowly. "Clearly, SkyLumen has not only dishonored one man, you have dishonored the very principle to which you pledged your mission, fair flight for all. And today, I have come not to reclaim your honor, but to reclaim the value of those words." Marcus placed a thin file in front of him. "I have 3 requests, not to negotiate, but to choose your side." He held up his first finger. One immediate dismissal of all personnel involved Aaron Blake, Nolan Pierce, Captain Thomas Avery, no suspension, no lingering investigation. The evidence speaks for itself. Second finger. 2, cancel the $50 million partnership between SkyLumen and EthosAI Systems. Not because I want to punish, but because EthosAI cannot stand by an organization that is not ready to change. Third finger. 3, I own 25% of EthosAI, and EthosAI is your core technology provider. If you choose to remain silent, I will sell all of my shares and withdraw the entire platform from the SkyLumen system. I don't need profits from a company that doesn't respect people. No one breathed heavily. The air felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Leonard raised his head slightly. His voice choked Marcus. "You know that will drag the company's value down to rock bottom." "Thousands of people," Will Marcus interrupted, softly but firmly. "They didn't lose their jobs because of me. Leonard, they lost their jobs because people like Mr. Nolan Pierce think that VIPs have more rights than a human being. If I back down today, tomorrow, 10 more people will be kicked out of 2A just because their skin is darker." One board member, Ruth Hale, head of corporate ethics, whispered, "Mr. Reed, if we do, will EthosAI continue to support SkyLumen's reform?" Marcus looked straight at her, his voice softer, but his eyes still firm. "If you are truly willing to change, EthosAI will not only support you, but will accompany you. But it must start with taking responsibility." Leonard sighed. The light reflecting off the projection screen cut through his eyes like a knife. He saw himself in that image, the leader who had let his organization become a symbol of arrogance. He stood up, looked around the room, and said in a low voice, "Gentlemen, Mr. Reed is right. We were wrong, not because we did not know, but because we did not want to see." He turned to Marcus. "I accept 3 conditions." A chorus of whispers broke out. One person objected. "Leonard, are you crazy? Canceling a $50 million contract is suicide." Leonard did not turn around. He simply said, "No, suicide is living without honor." Then he signed 3 signatures. Neat and decisive, the beginning of the collapse of an old generation of thinking. Marcus said nothing more. He just nodded slightly. Thank you. Leonard, justice is never an end. It is a beginning if we have the courage to face it. He turned off the screen. No one in the conference room dared to move. Only the sound of light rain outside the window and the resounding sound of pen signing echoed like the sound of a clock marking the end of an era. The meeting ended in silence. But outside, the media reported SkyLumen Airlines fires entire flight crew on SL414. Confirms a discrimination. Marcus Reed pulls out of $50 million contract. Claims fairness can't be bought. The market was in turmoil, and SkyLumen's stock was in free fall. But amid the panic, one thing emerged. There are falls that leave an organization cleaner than ever. As for Marcus, when the screen went black, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. Olivia Hart walked in, holding a cup of hot coffee. Do you think they'll change? Marcus smiled slightly. No one changes because they are forced to. But sometimes, falling is the only thing that makes people learn how to stand up properly. The next day, Wall Street opened in the red, and SkyLumen Airlines, the pride of American aviation, became a living example of what Marcus Reed once said. There is no such thing as a harmless mistake if you try to hide it. 7:15 a.m. The electronic board at SkyLumen Tower blinks incessantly. The company's stock has just dropped 12% in the opening session, and analysts predict that without clear action, it could hit 30% before the end of the day. The building was surrounded by media, cameras, microphones, and reporters crowded the sidewalks as if awaiting a trial. People called SkyLumen the soulless airline. Inside, Leonard Price stepped out of the elevator, his face drained of color. He needed no reminder. Yesterday's meeting with Marcus still echoed in his head. Every word he said felt like a knife, not drawing blood, but stabbing him to the bone. He went straight to the executive office. In his hand was the emergency dismissal decision, 3 names typed in bold on a white page. Aaron Blake, Chief Flight Attendant, SL414. Nolan Pierce, Flight Operations Manager. Captain Thomas Avery, Captain, 9:00 a.m., 22nd floor office. Aaron Blake was called up first. She was in uniform, her hair tied back, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. Sit down, Aaron, Leonard said, his voice low, no longer angry, just tired. Mr. Price. I was just following procedure, she said softly, almost pleadingly. I have no right to disobey orders. Leonard looked up, his gaze no longer that of a CEO, but of a man who had seen the moral limits of his system. You have the right, he said softly. You just choose not to use it. Aaron burst into tears. He said nothing more, just signaled for the guard to accompany her. The door closed, strangely quiet. The scene was exactly like the morning Marcus had been escorted off the plane. Only this time, the person being led away was the same person who had watched him leave. Next was Nolan Pierce. He entered, still trying to maintain his tough demeanor. Leonard, I did what was necessary. I protected the VIPs, maintained the image of the firm. Leonard looked straight at him. No, you defend pride, and the price of it is our honor, Nolan sneered. Are you listening to Marcus Reed? A guy who only knows how to film to destroy the company. Leonard stood up, his voice as deep as thunder. You still don't understand. It's because we treat people like him so badly that this company is dying. You weren't fired because you were wrong. You were fired because you didn't learn from your mistakes. Security closed in. This time, Nolan was escorted out of the building in front of dozens of waiting reporters. A poignant parallel to the video of Marcus being pushed off a plane 2 days earlier. Finally, Captain Thomas Avery, the man who had held the lives of hundreds of passengers in his hands, now stood before Leonard, silent, head bowed. He said nothing, and Leonard did not scold him either. He only asked one question. Why do you keep quiet when you see something wrong? Avery looked up, eyes red. I thought, it's none of my business. I just want the flight to be okay. Leonard nodded sadly. That's why all injustice exists. Captain, because everyone thinks justice is someone else's job. A piece of paper was slid across the table. Avery signed it, without a word. Then he left in silence. No more sirens, no more hurried footsteps, only the faintest sound of shoes hitting the stone floor, steady, like the sound of time rewriting its own justice. The market continued to tumble in the afternoon. SkyLumen shares closed at 18%, their lowest in 7 years. But the strange thing is, no one blamed Marcus Reed. Hundreds of thousands of people commented on social media. This is a lesson for every company that forgets about people. He doesn't take revenge. He teaches them a lesson about dignity. Justice doesn't need shouting. It just needs time. That evening, Leonard stood in front of his office window, looking out at the city lights. Olivia Hart sent him a message from EthosAI. We saw a real effort from SkyLumen. Marcus didn't say yes, but he said, they started with the truth, and that's enough for now. Leonard leaned his head back in his chair and closed his eyes. Not from fatigue, but from relief. For the first time in years, he felt that failure was no longer so terrible, when it was the price of regaining morality. In San Francisco, Marcus Reed sat by the window, listening to the waves crashing on the Golden Gate Bridge. Olivia walked in and said softly, they did what you asked. Everyone was fired. The market is in turmoil. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked away, his eyes distant. Justice isn't about losing someone's job. Olivia, it's about waking up the rest of us. He sipped his coffee and added softly, and if an organization has to fall to learn how to stand, then the fall was worth it. 2 days later, when SkyLumen announced a 48-hour network-wide flight suspension to restructure service culture, the global airline industry was stunned. No airline has ever dared to stop all flights in peacetime just to relearn how to treat people with kindness. Monday, SkyLumen flights across the United States canceled takeoffs. Hundreds of planes sat on the runways, lined up like steel birds waiting to be reborn. The airport was strangely silent. No loudspeakers, no angry passengers, just a brief announcement on the electronic board. SkyLumen Airlines suspends operations for 48 hours. Global Customer Service System Overhaul Program. The media called it the grounding of conscience in a press conference room in New York. Leonard Price appeared before the cameras, no longer in a fancy suit, no spokesman beside him. He stood alone, his voice hoarse but firm. We were not forced to stop flying. We stopped ourselves. Because sometimes, flying higher is not about moving forward. It is about landing to fix yourself. No one applauded, but no one left the room either. The world watched as a powerful corporation chose to bow its head, not because of pressure, but because it realized it was time to relearn the most basic lesson, respect. During those 48 hours, SkyLumen became a giant school. Every employee, from flight attendants, pilots, supervisors, to management, was summoned to training centers. And the person leading the program was none other than Marcus Reed. He wasn't standing on a podium. There was just a round table, a large screen, and waiting eyes. He began the first lesson in a soft voice, as if telling a story I used to sit in seat 2A, not to compete for a spot, but to test how many people in this system still remember what fairness is. The answer made me sad, but the sadness is not to blame, but to fix. No one said anything. Some flight attendants bowed their heads. Some wiped away tears. In the middle row, a middle-aged white man raised his hand. "Mr. Reed, can things really change? Or will everything go back to the way it was?" Marcus looked straight at him, smiling slightly. Change doesn't start with the system. It starts with the person who dares to ask that question. The program is called Ethos Renewal, designed by EthosAI Systems, a mandatory anti-bias course for all SkyLumen employees. No dry lectures, no slogans, just real-life situations recreated with data, cameras, and eyewitness accounts. In every class, Marcus emphasizes, prejudice is not born of malice. It is born when we forget that other people are human too. At the Chicago Training Center, a rare scene unfolded. Ruth Hale, a member of SkyLumen's ethics committee, sat with a group of new flight attendants. No priority seating, no titles. They discussed the choice between process and humanity. A young flight attendant, her eyes red, said softly, "I used to think that serving VIP guests well was an achievement. Now I understand. Serving fairly is an honor." Ruth nodded, smiling. "Yes, and that honor we have lost for too long." Meanwhile, in the SkyLumen main office, Leonard Price quietly watched the classes via live video. No one knew what he was thinking, but whenever Marcus appeared on screen, his eyes held something between regret and gratitude. The airline's financial loss is estimated to be more than $100 million thanks to the 48-hour grounding and ticket refunds, but surprisingly, no one complained. Thousands of passengers posted on social media, "I'm willing to wait 2 days." If the company really wants to be more human, justice doesn't slow you down. It teaches you to fly in the right direction. On the second day of the program, Marcus stood in a classroom in downtown Dallas. On the board was handwritten, "Fairness isn't a rule, it's a choice." He recounted the story of his father, who lost his life in a racially charged incident in Brookfield when Marcus was 15. "That day," he said, "I vowed never to let the world forget that people deserve to be treated with dignity, not prejudice." The room was deathly silent. Eyes, despite their different skin colors, read the words as if they were making a new oath. On the final evening of the fateful 48 hours, Marcus stood before the entire SkyLumen team in a large auditorium in New York. He didn't give a speech, just a short sentence. "I don't want SkyLumen to be the best. I want SkyLumen to be the company that looks back at itself before it's too late." The room was silent. Then came the applause, not thunderous, but slow, steady, and sincere. For the first time, the applause was not of applause, but of thanks. The next morning, SkyLumen flights resumed, but this time, boarding passengers saw more than just a first-class sign. They saw a small message plastered on the cabin wall. "Every seat deserves respect." An elderly passenger, upon reading the inscription, smiled slightly. He said to the flight attendant, I believe they have learned something. Justice doesn't end when someone is punished. It only ends when the wrongdoer is given a chance to make it right." And Marcus Reed understood that better than anyone. The 48 hours of retraining were over, and SkyLumen resumed flights. But the atmosphere inside the airline was no longer the same. People were no longer talking about how many millions the contract cost. but about seemingly simple things. The flight attendant's smiles, the way passengers were called by name, and the words, "Thank you for flying with us," now more genuine than ever. Leonard Price sat in his new office plain walls, a simple wooden desk. On it was a thick manuscript titled SkyLumen Ethics Charter 2025, a cultural reform program he and Marcus had co-written. "We can't just apologize," Marcus had told him. "We have to change the way the system works so there's no room for bias." And so, each article of the new SkyLumen Ethics Charter was born, not in empty words, but in concrete rules. First things first, it is absolutely forbidden to accept money, gifts, or favors in exchange for seats, class, or special services. Any violation, even the smallest thank you tip, will result in immediate termination. No exceptions. Second, establish a safe channel, a mechanism to protect internal whistleblowers. Any employee who discovers bias, bribery, or discrimination has the right to report anonymously, with absolute protection from dismissal or retaliation. Leonard signed each page of the regulations, then paused, saying softly, "This is something I wish someone had told me 20 years ago." Marcus smiled slightly. "It's never too late to do the right thing." Leonard. Third, create a transparent seat dispute resolution process. Now, when seat disputes arise, every decision is monitored via camera systems and electronic ticket data verification. There is no room for invisible privilege. Training sessions are streamed live to each branch. Stories like Marcus's and the mistakes of Aaron, Nolan, and Avery become real-life lessons that are incorporated into new employee training. At EthosAI Systems San Francisco office, Olivia Hart oversees a team that is developing bias-free monitoring technology, an artificial intelligence-based service behavior tracking system. The technology, developed by EthosAI, analyzes audio and video data to detect bias, discrimination, or bribery. "Do you think they will really change?" "An employee?" asked Olivia. She smiled, her eyes on the screen displaying the new SkyLumen logo, and said only, "They started by seeing their mistakes. That is the first sign of real change, and to ensure the change is more than just a cosmetic. SkyLumen has engaged an independent auditor, the Global Ethics Audit Group, to conduct regular performance reviews. They will examine all complaints, reports, and passenger fairness reviews. Only when the first report confirms there are no signs of systemic bias will Marcus agree to restore EthosAI's investment." As he signed the agreement, Leonard looked at Marcus, his voice sincere. "You're making me see. Justice is not an end, but an opportunity to do right." "Yes," Marcus replied calmly. "And justice only really matters when it makes people better themselves, not out of fear." 3 months later, the first results were announced. SkyLumen's customer complaint rate decreased by more than 70%, and Service Satisfaction Index increased by 40%, figures the company had never achieved in its history. The reporter asked Leonard, "Do you think SkyLumen has been forgiven?" He thought for a few seconds, then said, "Forgiveness is something no one can demand. But if we can make every flight a fairer and more respectful experience, then that would be the best apology." Meanwhile, at a final training session in Dallas, Marcus showed up unexpectedly. He had no documents or projector, just sat down among the flight attendants and ground staff. "You have heard my story," he said, his voice low, "but I have not come here to rehash the past. I have come here to say, it is you, not me, who are rewriting the history of SkyLumen." An older female flight attendant raised her hand. "Mr. Reed, I used to work under Aaron Blake. I was afraid when she was fired. afraid that I would be seen as indifferent too. But now, I feel relieved, because finally, we are allowed to say the right thing without fear of losing our jobs." Marcus nodded and replied softly, "That is true freedom, ma'am." That evening, Marcus returned to the hotel. From his 40th floor window, he looked down at the Dallas airport runway, where dozens of SkyLumen planes were parked in rows, their lights reflecting off them like silver ribbons. Olivia called, her voice soft. The independent audit just sent in its report. "Marcus, SkyLumen meets the highest standards of transparency." He paused for a moment, then said, "Then EthosAI will restore investment, but not to make money, but to prove those who dare to admit their mistakes deserve to be trusted again." The next morning, Leonard held a press conference. He announced the resumption of the partnership with EthosAI Systems, and also announced the equal seat policy. Every passenger, regardless of status or skin color, has equal rights in first class. When asked by a reporter if he regretted letting Marcus be offended, Leonard just smiled sadly. "I can't change that day. But I can guarantee that tomorrow no one will have to go through the same thing." Systemic change always comes at a cost. But the biggest cost isn't in the financial statements. It's in the lives left behind. 3 months after SkyLumen completed its restructuring, the press began to quiet down. The company recovered, and its stock price began to rise again. But outside the noisy orbit, a few people still lived in the quiet, unmentioned spaces. They were once part of the first-class cabin of Flight SL414. Now, each drifts in a different corner of America, carrying a story that no newspaper has the courage to tell. Nolan Pierce, a former flight operations manager, was once a household name in the aviation industry. He was used to giving orders and being feared, but after being fired from SkyLumen, everything changed. His resume was sent to more than 24 airlines. No response. The unofficial pilots union announced no cooperation with Nolan Pierce. Abuse of power that harms the industry. In the small world of aviation, that's a permanent freeze. Nolan sold his Lexus and moved back to his old apartment in suburban Atlanta. He woke up early every day, made coffee, and sat for hours in front of his computer, watching applications get returned. One morning, he received an email from a small firm in Florida, but the last line left him speechless. "We can't risk our company's image." He put the letter down on the table, watching his hands tremble slightly. Once upon a time, he had believed that power came naturally to those who commanded. Now, he understood, power is not given. It is given by trust, and lost with respect. Out west, Erin Blake, the woman at the center of the cabin conflict, lives quietly in Portland. She no longer wears her blue and silver uniform or carries a SkyLumen name tag. After her layoff, Erin applied to many other customer service companies. But every time she interviewed, the recruiter would look at her resume and their eyes would change. They knew her not because of her accomplishments, but because of the video that went viral that year. Her name appeared online as a symbol of a silent enabler, someone who stays silent in the face of injustice. No one asked her how she was forced. No one cared if she regretted it. Only one label stuck someone who lets wrongs happen. Erin works part-time at a small cafe and lives with her sister. Every morning, when she serves customers, she always greets them with a smile, though sometimes the strange looks in their eyes make her feel awkward. One day, a customer recognized her and whispered, "Are you the hostess in that video? I used to be mad at you, but now I think you must have learned something bigger than your career." Erin didn't answer, just nodded. The words, though small, made her cry when she got home. For the first time in months, She felt that perhaps justice wasn't just about losing people, but about finding them again. Captain Thomas Avery, a veteran pilot with more than 8,000 hours of flight time, has left the cockpit forever. He lives in a small town in Montana, teaching elementary flying classes to teenagers. The cockpit door is now just a memory. Late afternoons, he still looks up at the sky, watching the SkyLumens fly by, and each time, he takes a deep breath as if to apologize to himself. When a student asked teacher, "Why don't you fly for a big airline anymore?" he simply replied, "Because one day I chose to stay silent when I should have spoken up." The boy nodded, not understanding. But Thomas knew the lesson was more important than any flight he had ever flown. And then there's Victoria Grant, the woman who sat in seat 2A, who smiled as Marcus was escorted off the plane. After the incident, she was banned from flying with SkyLumen for life. Not only that, her image and name appeared all over social media, associated with the phrase "the entitled passenger." Friends shunned her. The fashion brand she had been an ambassador for canceled its contract. Every time she went out, she had to wear large sunglasses to avoid prying eyes. In lonely evenings, Victoria would rewatch the video, stopping at the moment when Marcus was still smiling, even though he was insulted. "How can he be so calm?" she whispered. And for the first time, instead of anger, she felt truly ashamed. Their story, Nolan, Aaron, Avery, Victoria, spread in the private circles of the service industry. No one laughed. No one mocked. There was silence, because everyone knows, in a world where prejudice and power are everywhere, a moment of weakness can cost a person everything. Marcus Reed knew all that. He was neither happy nor gloating. In the meeting with Olivia Hart, he said slowly, "Justice has done its part, but if we stop here, it will only be punishment. I want something bigger, redemption." Olivia looked at him, knowing Marcus was up to something different. A new project, the Second Chance Initiative, a program for people who had made mistakes if they had the courage to face them. Because Marcus understands that justice isn't just about making wrongdoers pay. It's about helping them make things right with the world. And sometimes, the path to redemption is the bravest journey a person can take. 9 months after the SkyLumen incident, a small press conference took place at the headquarters of EthosAI Systems in San Francisco. There were no jostling reporters, no flashbulbs, just a few rows of chairs, a simple sign that read Second Chance Initiative, a journey for those who dare to take responsibility. Marcus Reed stepped up to the podium, unprepared for a speech. He looked out at the room, where there were only a few bowed faces. People the world had once called many other names, abusers, silent men, losers. But to him, today, they were simply people starting over. "We can't change the past," Marcus said slowly, "but we can choose how we deal with it. Second chance isn't about forgiveness. It's about learning to live better after we've been wrong." The first 3 students of the program appeared before everyone. Nolan Pierce, his figure thinner, his old suit slightly wrinkled at the shoulders. Erin Blake, her hair cut short, her eyes still a little wary, but no longer evasive. And Captain Thomas Avery, calm, with the look of someone who has experienced a storm and chosen peace as his friend. No reporters, no applause, just an eerie silence, the silence of the beginning. During the first week, Marcus taught directly. He didn't talk about their mistake, nor did he mention Flight SL414. He just asked one question. What have you ever believed that made you think you were right? The question hung in the air like a mirror. Nolan was the first to respond. Maybe because I used to think serving the people who pay the most was the top priority. He hesitated, then said softly, "But now I understand that favoritism doesn't start with malice. It starts with small choices and silence when you see something wrong, but don't dare to speak up." Marcus nodded, his eyes gentle but deep. And that is how prejudice survives. Not because of bad people, but because of good people, who just don't have the courage. Erin listened silently, her fingers twisting the pen in her hand. When Marcus asked, "And you, Erin, what made you choose to stay silent that day?" she replied, her voice choked up, "I was afraid of losing my job. I thought protesting was going against my superiors. But now, every night I think maybe silence is the greatest betrayal of all." The room fell silent. Marcus looked at her and said softly, "Courage isn't about shouting. Sometimes it's about saying no when everyone else is bowing their heads." Erin nodded slightly, tears rolling down her face, but a smile eventually appeared. Thomas Avery, a former captain, was now the oldest student in the class. He didn't say much, only asking to speak at the end of the class. He stood up slowly. "Looking around the room, I was the captain back then. I had the right to stop and ask for a review of the procedure. But I chose to remain silent, not because I agreed, but because I was afraid of trouble. I used to think that silence was neutral, but neutrality between right and wrong is always being on the wrong side." Many bowed their heads. Marcus was silent for a long time, then said, "You are not the only one who believed it, Captain, but you are one of the few who dared to say it." The second week, Marcus took them to a real customer service center where they faced the consequences of bias in action. They were no longer the ones being blamed, but instead mentored new employees, teaching them through their own mistakes. Nolan sat down with a group of interns and watched videos of unconscious bias. One young employee asked, "Do you think there's any way to tell if you're being biased?" Nolan smiled and slowly replied, "Yes. When you see someone who doesn't look like a VIP and you want to give them a little less service, that's when you have to stop." Erin was assigned to train the new crew. She recounted that fateful moment not to justify it, but to remind them that one person's silence can bring shame to the entire crew. A young woman stood up and asked, "Are you scared to tell that story?" Erin smiled sadly. "Yes, but I'm more scared not to tell it, because when you don't share what you've learned, someone else will make the same mistake." And Thomas Avery, he became a guest lecturer at the National Aviation Academy. His course was called Leadership in Silence. He told students about the cost of not acting when they saw something wrong. The lesson had no slides, just a hoarse voice. My friends, sometimes what kills the honor of a commander is not an accident, but the moment they choose to remain silent because they are afraid of losing their position. The students were silent. One of them asked, "Do you regret it?" Avery replied, "I don't regret getting fired. I regret it took me my entire career to learn that lesson." Marcus followed their journey from afar. Each week he received reports, photos of them teaching, laughing, sharing. None of them looked judged anymore. They had returned not to be forgiven, but to be part of the healing. One afternoon, Olivia Hart asked him, "Do you think second chance really works?" Marcus looked out the window, where dust fell over the city, the light painting the buildings gold. "Justice doesn't have to work," he said softly. "It just has to be real." At the end of the program, Marcus organized a reunion. Nolan, Erin, and Avery sat around the table, no longer shy. "I thought justice was the end," Avery said, "but now I see it can be the beginning if we dare to face it." Marcus laughed, his voice low. "You made it happen. Second chance doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who has done wrong and still wants to do right." The room fell silent, but this time it was not a silence of fear, but of peace. 6 months later, SkyLumen is back stronger than ever. And on the 1-year anniversary of its rebirth, two men who once fought, Marcus Reed and Leonard Price, stand side by side on the same stage, proving that justice is not just about punishment, but about progress. The ceremony was held at the New York International Convention Center. No fancy backdrop, no banners, just a simple stage with the new SkyLumen logo, a pair of wings unfolding from a dim light. Below the seats, hundreds of airline employees, from pilots, flight attendants, engineers, to ground staff, sat upright, quietly watching. On the big screen, the words appeared: SkyLumen 1 Year of Fair Skies. An independent report by the Global Ethics Audit Group confirms SkyLumen has officially risen to the top 3 most satisfied airlines in the U.S. and is at the top in terms of Customer Service Fairness Index. The media called it the comeback of business ethics, but Marcus Reed didn't want it to be remembered as a victory. He told Leonard backstage, before going on stage, "Don't make today a PR story. Leonard, let it be a reminder that I was wrong, and I chose to get up the right way." Leonard nodded, smiling a rare smile for a man burdened with guilt. "You know," he said, "last year, I didn't sleep for 3 months. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw you being escorted off the plane. I thought, if you had lost your temper that day, I probably wouldn't be standing here today." Marcus looked at him, his voice soft but firm. "No one wins in anger. Leonard, true justice does not need to be loud. It just needs to be bright enough for everyone to see the way." As the two men stepped onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet in a slow, thunderous applause. In the front row, Aaron Blake, Nolan Pierce, and Captain Thomas Avery were there no longer as convicted criminals, but as guest speakers at an aviation ethics training program. Their faces were calm, their eyes strangely bright, the light of people who had moved on from their mistakes and learned to be kinder. Leonard spoke first. He did not use the word repentance, nor did he talk about a reform strategy. He simply told a true story. Exactly a year ago, we forced a man out of a first-class seat he had legally purchased, simply because we thought he didn't belong there. But it turns out, we were the ones who didn't belong there. The room fell silent. Leonard turned to Marcus, bowed his head, and said, "I do not stand here today as the CEO of SkyLumen. I stand here as a man who has been taught the greatest lesson of his life by another man, that justice does not need to conquer anyone. It only needs to conquer itself." Marcus stepped forward. No notes, no speech. He just looked at the SkyLumen staff seats and said, "I used to think that changing a system was the hardest thing. But it wasn't. The hardest thing was making a person believe that he could change." He stopped and looked around, his eyes settling on the faces that had once been scared, once complacent, once blind. Now they sat there, straight-backed, silent, as if they understood what he was saying. "Justice isn't only punishment," he said, "it's progress. Justice isn't just punishment, it's progress." The hall erupted in applause, not applause of appreciation, but applause of people witnessing something real, something they knew, deep down, they needed to hear. Outside the auditorium, the New York sky was unusually clear. A SkyLumen aircraft took off, sunlight glinting off its silver fuselage, on its wings. The logo of the Wings of Light reflected brightly, a reminder that every journey of justice begins with humility. That evening, after the ceremony ended, Marcus and Leonard stood by the large window overlooking the runway. Planes lined up, preparing to take off. Leonard whispered, "Did you ever think justice could be this beautiful?" Marcus smiled. "Justice is never beautiful when it arrives. It only becomes beautiful when people are brave enough to change because of it." The two of them were silent. No one said anything more. Only the sound of the engine faded away, disappearing into the sky, where the past, mistakes, and redemption merged into a thin, endless line of light. Marcus Reed was walking down the airport corridor. On the wall, a new SkyLumen billboard read, "Every seat deserves respect." He paused for a second, touched the logo, and walked away. Behind him, a deep voice said, "You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to be angry to be respected. Just stand still and let the truth speak for you." The screen slowly faded. The final line read, "Justice is more than punishment. It is progress. Justice is more than punishment. It is progress." Sometimes justice comes not in a scream, but in the steadfast silence of a man who knows who he is and chooses to stand tall in the midst of injustice. The story of Marcus Reed, the black man who was forced out of first class because of the color of his skin and who went on to change the system, is not just about racism. It's about dignity, wisdom, and the power of remaining calm when you have every reason to be angry. From the moment of humiliation, Marcus did not choose to retaliate, but chose to act with intelligence. He did not seek revenge. He sought justice. And in the end, it was this calmness that made those who had wronged him look back at themselves, not just with remorse, but with real change. The message of the story is simple but profound. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not letting it rob us of our dignity. Justice is not just about punishment. It is about progress, about daring to believe that people can be better than they were yesterday, even when they have been wrong. If this story touches you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that together we can spread human values, lessons of courage, tolerance, and the belief that the world can still become better if only each of us starts with the right action. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next stories where justice is always told with the heart.